get started. So hello everyone. I hope you're doing well today. I'd like to introduce myself and welcome you to this afternoon's webinar on Fieldwork in Crossfire, a view of political violence from inside and out. This webinar is one in a series of webinars addressing topics aligned with the School of Professional Studies Masters of Science program in negotiation and conflict resolution. My name is Andrew Hummer. I'm an advisor in the School of Professional Studies, and I will be facilitating some of our conversations today. If you are able to hear me, please go ahead and type yes into the Q&A box down at the bottom of the screen. You can go ahead and click the Q&A box and just type yes, just to make sure that everybody can hear us. And while everyone is typing yes to confirm audio, I do have a few housekeeping announcements to share with the group before we get started. I do encourage you to utilize the Q&A function as you sort of develop questions during the presentation. And at the end of today's session, we will be addressing some of those questions with the speakers. We will not be using the chat box function for this webinar, so please let us know if you have any questions via the Q&A box. I would also like to share with the group that today's session is being recorded and will be made available to you at the end for your convenience. At this time, I would like to welcome today's presenter. Joining us today is Kirsten Pugh, Associate Director of Curriculum Development for the Masters of Science in Negotiation and Conflict Resolution program, and also an alumni from the NECR program. Hey, Kirsten, how are you doing today?
I'm great, Andy. Thank you. And welcome to everyone who is joining us today. Today, I am filling in for Dr. Beth Fisher-Yoshida, who is the Academic Director of the Negotiation and Conflict Resolution Program and the Co-Executive Director of the Advanced Consortium on Cooperation, Conflict, and Complexity, also known as AC4, here at Columbia University. Today, we have invited Dr. Gorka Roman to speak on identity amidst violence, in the Basque context. Dr. Roman is a professor at the University of the Basque Country and is a visiting scholar at AC4. His unique insights on conflict and violence in the Basque region complement key areas of focus within the NECR program. In particular, the program focuses on developing self-awareness and bridging the gap between the classroom and the field so as to develop scholar practitioners. Understanding our role as researchers and our relationships to the conflict allows us to contextualize and inform what we do in the field. Just as conflict does not exist in a vacuum, neither does this work. Our implicit and explicit biases also have the potential to impact our work. Therefore, both self-awareness and the ability to analyze and interpret data can mitigate the impacts of these biases. Lastly, it is critical for the researcher to understand both in-group and out-group dynamics, which are present in all conflict. Dr. Roman's research will help us explore and better understand these dynamics and the tensions within the role of the insider as researcher. So without further ado, the floor is yours, Dr. Roman. Thank you for being here.
Hi, how are you? Okay, so we'll start by introducing a bit the agenda. First of all, I'd like to apologize because I'm not a native English speaker, so my English is not as good as I'd like to, but well, I'll do my best. So pretty much we'll start with a brief introduction. We will continue with the contextualization and an hypothesis that I propose for this presentation. Then I'll explain a bit the Basque country and the context and why the conflict is happening actually. And then I'll explain my own personal experiences as a researcher when being an insider as well. And I'll do a theoretical approach to the national otherness from this perspective as well. And then I'll talk about some issues about the post-conflict society in the Basque country and about the role of an insider researcher in this case. And we will finish with some conclusions. So first of all, I'd like to start doing kind of a warming up. I know probably you have asked to yourself these questions, but these questions, when you live within a conflict, within a society which is living a conflict, such as the the Basque one? I mean, these are questions that you normally ask yourself when you are involved in the research. So this very first one would be like, if you know, how did you you politically become the person you are in the present? Which were the steps you did, which were the decisions or the choices you made. And also as well, if you are conscious of your social and cultural national us and who is your otherness, because we all have in the end, in this kind, when we live in this kind of societies, a social and national cultural otherness. Um, Also, if you think that your past political options and decisions have had any influence in your present social political affiliation. These are interesting questions when you live within a society which is immersed in a conflict, in a conflict like the Basque in the Basque country, where political decisions can have tragic consequences, as we will see in this example here. Um, this woman here in the photo, she's Joyes. She was a member of ETA. I don't know if you know, ETA is the armed group that was involved in violence, in political violence in the Basque country for more than half century. And she joined ETA, which means Euskadi eta Askatasuna, Basque Country and Freedom. And she joined ETA in 1971. She was an active member of the BOM, of the group. She killed some people. And 9 years later, she contacted the Spanish government because she wanted to quit using the violence. She thought she was fed up. She wanted to start a peace process somehow. She was one of the first ones. She actually was the first person within ETA that wanted to leave the armed group. So she went to Mexico. She was there. She had a son. She lived there for 3 years, from 1980 to 1984, more or less. And then she decided to come back to the Basque country. So as I said before, political decisions like quitting ETA can have tragic consequences, like she was killed. Of course, she was the first person quitting ETA. So the armed group, ETA in this case, wouldn't allow that, because that was in these politicized and dualistic societies, there's no space for grace. You are either with us or against us. This is only black and white. But these tragic consequences that not only happen in the Basque arena, because this is a conflict which is that has two main parts, two parties, let's say, yeah. So we also had state terrorism for long years, from the 70s to the late 90s. We have this state terrorism carried out by the Spanish government with paramilitary groups such as GAL, AAA, Batallón Vasco Español, and so on. And this existence of this violence, such as this state terrorism, and in the present we can see that there are Franquist and fascist groups that are legal in Spain that haven't been illegalized. This somehow justifies a counter violence, a defensive violence that is, I'll explain later on. The Glenn Bowman defines a defensive violence, which complicates the whole political and conflict context of the Basque country. I actually think that we should start with an hypothesis, a possible hypothesis to this presentation, which could be the following one, with specific personal and ethical choices within a politically dualistic and divided society can allow people to unconsciously create alliances and enemies. So the choices, therefore, function as key factors to classify and perceive self and other in certain social and political positions that embody the existence of symbolic, structural, and physical violence. Basically, this means that in dualized and politically dualized societies, which are immersed in a conflict such as the Basque one, making certain political choices will set you in a specific human political groups, and you will either become an ally or an enemy. It is very difficult to be in the middle of the fight, so that's why peacemakers and people who are doing conflict resolution, they do have really difficult situations in this kind of context. So we have to think that until the 21st century, beginning of the 27th century, few people were, willing to be involved in the Basque conflict because it was very dangerous to take part in it as peacemaker. So I think I first should explain a bit about the Basque country itself, because I don't know if you all know what's going on, where is it, what was the conflict about. The Basque country is a region composed with 7 provinces, which is divided in 2 countries. It's northern Spain and southern France. It is composed by 7 different provinces. We have the official Basque country, which is composed by 3 southern provinces, which is Vizcaya, Guipúzcoa, and Araba. And then we have as well as a separated province in the Spanish state, within the Spanish state, which is Navarra. And then we have the 3 Basque, northern Basque or French provinces, which is Lapurdi, Benafarroa, and Zuberoa. The 3 of them compose the Basque nation, let's say, but they all of them, they belong to different national states. So that's one of the problems. As I said before, the Basque country is situated between France and Spain. The Basque official country has like less than 2,200,000 citizens within it. But in total, let's say there will be like 3.5 million, the total population of the Basque people. The capital city is Vitoria-Gasteiz, so probably, not probably, Bilbao is the biggest city and the most important city within the Basque country. The Basque language, if you don't know, is one of the oldest known languages in the world. A part of it is the only Proto-European language in Europe, together with Finnish and Hungarian. So for you to have an idea, the origins of the Spanish language itself is a mix of Basque or Euskera, Latin, and a vernacular language that was there. Even the Greeks, like Strabon in 2080, described the Basque and their languages and and their customs as well. The Romans also had contacts, but never settled in the Basque country. They only had like sporadic settlements. In the Basque country is divided in 2 parts. It's Saltus Vasconum, which is the northern Basque country, which is full of mountains, and the southern Basque country, which is flat, and that's the Ager Vasconum. And there's where the Romans made some road and had some settlements, but they never really stayed there. And we have to think as well, the Basque country from the beginning of the 8th century AD to the late 15th century was the only place in Portugal and Spain that was free of the Arab Caliphate that stayed there for like 7 centuries. So that means that the Basque country had been for the whole history a very isolated society, a very isolated region with their own, cultural, linguistic characteristics. So there is a singular language, there is a singular culture, there are some singular traditions as well that make it different from basically different from Spain and France. That's why they never felt like a part of them. There have been like historically as well some specific political systems like ancient tribes, the fiefdoms. There was as well before the Catholic kings, the Kingdom of Navarra, which was in charge, in power within half of the region of Spain and north on southern France as well. And we had other like we had the photos as well that were given. This is some regional medieval code of laws that were given by the Catholic kings, and they remain until the end of the 19th century. And then we had the modern Basque government that was created in 1936, but in 1936, as well as we will see now, there was the coup d'etat of Francisco Franco, of fascist dictatorship that stayed in Spain and in the Basque country for more than 50 years. So then the Basque government was taken to exile until the death of the dictator, which was in the 1976. So pretty much Franco's dictatorship was a coup d'etat. He was allied with Hitler and Mussolini, as it was a fascist regime that in 1936 he decided to go against the legal government of Spain. It was a republic, and he also conquered Basque country. And well, we have this the famous bombing of Guernica that was part of this coup d'etat called or known as the Spanish Civil War. It happened in the 1937. It was like the first bombing against civil society. And well, during these long years, Basque people were massacred and hundreds of thousands were either murdered, tortured, imprisoned for reasons such as speaking Basque or performing the Basque traditions. So as I said before, during Franco's dictatorship, other cultural, linguistic, ethnic, or national minorities were forbidden and oppressed. So thousands were imprisoned, murdered, or taken to jail for performing any cultural, characteristic or any cultural issue different from the Spanish one or the hegemonic one. So the Basque Country became the subalternity in this case. Yeah. In this context of cultural and political oppression, some revolutionary groups appeared. In the case of the Basque Country, we have ETA, as I said before, Euskadi Askatasuna, or Basque Country and Freedom, that it was founded in 1952, and it was in the very beginning a group of intellectuals. They were defending the use of Basque Country, of the Basque, sorry, and they wanted to defend the use of the culture and the use of the language. But 10 years later, because many of these people here joining this group of intellectuals were taken to jail or were either killed or tortured. So in the 1964, they decided to start an armed struggle. So we start speaking about the conflict, or the Basque conflict in this period of the Basque latest history. So for decades, ETA had an important support from the Basque society and from some regions in Spain as well. We are talking about the 60s, the 70s. There were like some political assassinations of members of the army, of the Spanish army, or the police corps, the Spanish police corps, who were in charge of torturing and in jailing people. And for instance, one of their main attacks against the Franquist government was the political killing of Carrero Blanco, who was supposed to be the successor of Franco. But after this story has been very long, so I won't be explaining this very deeply because we don't have time for that. But after diverse failed peace processes in the Basque Country and the change of a strategy of ETA that started to target like new people apart from the policemen or the members of the Spanish army. They started to kill like some Spanish businessmen, some journalists that were against them, some judges that were like taking them to jail as well, and also some Spanish politicians. In this case, was the politicians belonging to Spanish parties in the Basque Country. So they will see them as occupiers, so they will target them as well, and many of them, of course, were killed. We have to make some differences between when we talk about the Basque conflict. We have to make differences between the political conflict and the armed conflict. The political conflict is a conflict that is coming at least from the end of the 19th century. Where these fueros or medieval laws that I was talking before, they were like cancelled, they were illegalized. So the Basque Country lost somehow independence, and therefore, this is the beginning of the political conflict and the birth at the end of the 19th century of the Basque nationalist movement as well. But the armed conflict, as we said before, starts with ETA, probably in the 1950s, not because it was just an intellectual party, let's say, or movement, but yes, in the 60s is where the real armed conflict starts in the Basque Country. So I'd like to explain some facts about the Basque Country in the present, because it can be meaningful when we explain why the Basque nationalist is a nationalist society and an independentist society. When anyone asks me, but why are you independentists? Why do you want to be something different from Spain or France? Are you not happy inside France and Spain? So I'm going to just use some issues that make show you why most of the people in the Basque Country want to be independent. So first of all, is because the economical conditions. País Vasco, the Basque Country, and Navarra are the two they do have are the richest areas in the Spain, and they have the highest income per capita as well. So the only one over them is Madrid, but Madrid, because it's the centralized city, which is receiving all the taxes from all the country, so that's the only reason why. But I mean, we have to consider these two parts are the richest parts in Spain, with a big difference with southern Spain as well. Yeah, we have to think that there is a Basque government since the 1967 that has changed totally the structure and the economical situation of the Basque country, which in the 70s and early 80s was in a terrible economical crisis. There was a very big rate of unemployment, but many things have been done since, and nowadays we have our own educational system with the highest standards. We normally follow the Finnish model, which is considered one of the best in the world. We have one of the best health systems as well in the world, and we have a very strong social care network as well. There is a very strong industrial and scientific network. The Basque country usually looks more to Europe rather than to Spain. It tries to have more relations and build a network of economical and scientific networks with European northern countries rather than with Spain, for instance. Yeah, and another important issue is that Basque nationalist parties have been in power since the end of the dictatorship and before as well. Yes. There is a big feeling, national feeling, which is supported as well by the existence of national sports teams. Some of them are not official yet, such as the soccer team, because they are not allowed by the Spanish government. But other sports teams, they are competing internationally, so that makes it as well like an important fact when talking about Basque nationalism. And late in the last decade, 2 decades, it has become into one of the top tourism destinations. We have cities like San Sebastian, we have Bilbao, we even have Pamplona with the running of the bulls. So we have like very famous places where people like to visit. So it is year by year is increasing, and it's becoming one of the top touristic destinations within Spain as well, which is the second country in the world. I mean, in this case, Spain, the second country in the world after France, I think, with the biggest amount of tourists every year. So all these facts that I explained before are very important when talking about a national feeling. And this is where what I studied when I did my PhD dissertation in 2015 on political science. And I did research on a concept which is the national desire. And I tried to analyze how this national desire is created, how people want to fight or want to feel national, and how is this feeling created. Here I study different issues. For instance, I'm gonna just present some of them because, of course, the PhD dissertation was very long, so I'm just going to explain a couple of facts that might be interesting to know why the Basque conflict happened before I start more with the role of the research. Yeah. So we always have in every nationalism we have the two dimensions, which is the vertical one and the horizontal one. The vertical one is related more to the ethnocultural background, to having a certain language, certain culture, some traditions, religions, etc., that makes you basically different from the other national communities around you. And then there are some present material conditions that here we talk about the economy, the politics, the diplomacy, all these issues that are set in this horizontal dimension of nationalisms that also help creating this national desire. So we have the influence of this vertical and this horizontal dimensions that actually also are important in this, in this making the people feel like they are different from the rest. There is as well that this concept that I explained before is the issue of violence, of having a violence that you feel as a national community, a violence that is against you. In this case, the Basque consider the Spanish violence during the dictatorship, as many were massacred and the language and the cultural issues were prohibited, well illegalized. So they considered this was a violence against them, a violence against their own health, wealth. And so it is created a counter violence that um, um, apart from fighting that violence that you suffer as a national group, it creates like a different types of dualistic discourses, rhetorics of identity that are really important when we analyze this kind of political and armed conflict nowadays, such as the Basque country. Then there's like the Northern Irish one as well. When we see that the societies are very dualized, and because the existence of this kind of violences, yes. Then I also analyzed the existence of a national poet. These are members of the society that are able to speak in a very performative way. They are able to create performative messages. And they push the people, their national fellows, to fight for the cause. And nowadays, we have the case of Catalonia, where they declared their independence over Spain as well. And we have this fight and this political fight right now. And we have the image of some national poets, which are they're using this kind of performative messages. And I'm going to explain, for instance, the case of Pep Guardiola. Pep Guardiola was a player of the soccer team Barcelona, which is one of is one of the best soccer teams in the world. Then he became the coach of the same team. Now he's training some teams. I think, I don't know if it is Chelsea in the English league. So he's a guy who is really famous in Europe. He's really famous in Spain, and he's really famous in Catalonia. And he is a pro-independentist. He supports the independence of Catalonia. So every time he speaks, all the opinion of the members of the Catalonian society rise, and when every time they do a survey, they see how this intention of voting independentist parties rise. So all these issues that I explained before, like very briefly, compose this national desire that I explained before, and explain how nationalism is defended as a standardized form of international way of doing politics, that is replicated by everyone because it's a very successful way of doing politics. In this context where nationalism and nationalist ideas are so strong, violence takes this form of a dualistic way of doing politics and a dualistic way of doing constructing the political chapter in the content we were explaining. After this brief explanation of what the Basque country is and what these Basque characteristics are, and about the Basque conflict, I hope we can start talking about what this presentation is about, what is the role of the researcher in a society when he is part of it, when he's an outsider. Yes. So with this presentation, first I try to explain some life experiences. In this case, my own life experiences, and which are the consequences of doing research in a conflict where I'm part of. I was born in the Basque country. I took part somehow politically in the conflict. So how is it to be a researcher in this kind of context? Then I would like to explain as well the Basque armed and political conflict from this perspective, from the perspective first of a random person as a normal citizen, and then as a political militant, and then as a dissident, and then as well as a researcher. Because in my case, I had taken the 4 different roles. I also like to explain, as we said before in our hypothesis, how making certain ethnic and political decisions, so taking certain decisions, might move people from a state of from a certain group, from a certain political group, from a certain ethnic group, for a certain national group, to another one, to a new one, which can take you to a very dangerous no man's land, somewhere where you don't belong to any of the places and where you are in a real risk when doing research. And I also would like to explain how is it could be you could be transferred from this us I was telling you before to this other that I also talked to you about before, in this kind of scenarios. That's why we're asking you if you're in your past life, in your life, the decisions, the political decisions you have taken, they do have consequences in your life nowadays. In some contexts, in some societies, they do have an important relevance, and they actually are the last reason for you to be in the situation you are. So first of all, I'm going to explain a bit my origins, because this probably is the result why today I'm how I am. My father's father, my grandfather, he was an Spanish anarchist. He married to a very traditional Basque woman who was my grandmother. So this was a very weird couple, actually. Yes, because you have this woman who was very traditionalist, very Basque, very classic. You know, he was a Catholic, and then you have this man who was an anarchist. He will fight any kind of like right wing political party and so on. And then you have my mother's father and mother. Both of them were like Basque nationalist farmers, and my grandfather, in this case, he was soldier of the Basque National Army. The two men, my two grandfathers, they were like basically were different people. One of them who was an Spanish anarchist, the other one was a Basque nationalist, but both of them joined their fight against Franco, against Franco's regime. Pretty much everyone, the communists, the left, right wing, the anarchists, the traditionalists, everyone joined an army to fight Franco, but there was nothing to do against Franco. I mean, he had the support of the Italian and German fascists, of Mussolini and Hitler, so they lost the war in 1937. So of course, both of them were imprisoned. One of my grandparents were also tortured in jail. They spent long years in jail. And then, well, my father and my mom, they were born in this context as well. My father, he became a real well-known, famous car racer. He won championships in Spain and Europe like many times. So that's why his identity was more hybrid. He didn't really feel nor Spanish nor Basque 100%. He didn't feel anything like this political identity. Nowadays you ask him and he doesn't really care. I mean, he just was doing his sport, his racings, so he was happy with that. My mom, on the other hand, she was born in this small country here in the second photo. It was called Rigoitia. This town is very close to Guernica, the city that was bombed by the fascists, by the Hitlers and Mussolini's planes in 1937, sorry. And so she's been always a very nationalist woman. So they took me to in this third photo. You see the school I studied. Actually, this is a Basque school. These schools were legalized before the 1976, 1977. Normally they used to be clandestine or illegalized or illegal schools. This one here became legal in the 1977. So I joined this school, which is called Ikastola, where Basque language and Basque culture and Basque nation would be defended. Well, I was born in the 77, so I lived these very tough years, which is in the 80s and the 90s. There was the decades with the extreme violence carried out by ETA and also by the Spanish paramilitary groups. There were like some years there were almost up to 100 kills, people assassinated. There was a very, very violent period of the history of Basque history. Yeah. So when I was 14, 15-year-old, I had my first contact through my classmates in the Ikastola, the school I explained you before. And we used to go and party in the old town of my city. We would used to go to bars. So here I used to have my first political conversations. I first started to know people involved in the political struggle and fight. So actually, joining these kind of conversations and meeting and knowing this kind of people was a way of gaining social prestige within the society. And imagine you are a teenager looking for recognition within your group of friends, within your society, and so on. So I mean, this was a way. Getting involved in the fight was a way of gaining social prestige and social power, as I said before, which is a normal thing among the teenagers nowadays as well. Yeah. So one of the best ways to be part of the political and the armed national community was being a native Basque speaker, because many people who were joining ETA Euskadi Askatasuna by that time, as Basque was forbidden decades before within Franco's dictatorship, many of them couldn't speak Basque. But let's say the new Basques, those who were born in the 70s, we were like Basque native speakers. So being a native speaker was a very important thing, because language in this case Basque was a symbol, a national symbol to be proud of. Yes. So having knowledge about the conflict and showing political commitment as well, these were like the three very important ways to join this radical pro-independence movement in the Basque country. I have to say that, as in the case, as it happened in the case of Northern Ireland, we had, in Northern Ireland, they had the IRA, but then they had as well the Sinn Féin, who was the political party of the armed group. But in the Basque country, it happened exactly the same. We have ETA, Euskadi Askatasuna, but we also have Izquierda Abertzale or Herri Batasuna. We have different political parties. Was the same political party, but as it had been illegalized constantly, they will change the name and they will create again the same party. This party was really important. It's always been the second most voted party in the Basque country. Will get probably around 30% of the votes in the Basque country as well. We have to think that the Basque country, politics in the Basque country is not like in the United States, that you have the Democrats and the Republicans. In the Basque country, you can have like up to 7, 8 political different parties. So having 30% of the votes is like a very important number in the end. So you can see that many people were by that time supporting, the independent movement and also ETA's struggle or fight. And how did I become part of that community? Well, when I was 17-year-old, I joined this group called Gestoras por Amnistía, and this group will defend the political. It was a political association defending the rights of the ETA prisoners or the ETA members. And some years later, this organization was declared illegal and as a terrorist organization by the Spanish government. So this happened probably 10 years after I joined it, is when it became an illegalized organization. Actually, the way of joining this organization was always pretty much the same. You will join these political demonstrations, you will go, you show your how nationalist you were and how against the Spanish government you were. You will do like you will paint like political graffitis stating your political ideas and so on. Yes. And this is pretty much as well, it happens like it happened in other places in the world. It happens a bit that remind me Hebdit's subculture, this book he wrote, that I worked with it as well, doing another paper on the violence carried out by the Black Bloc and the Kale Borroka that I explained later on. How we would, these members of the community that mostly we were young, the young members of this community, we will dress in the same way, we will perform the same, rituals, dressing and speaking rituals. Our language will be pretty much the same. We will share and we will use the same narratives, the same discourses, the same dualistic discourses, and we will create that national and political otherness. We'll say, look, that person there, he's dressing like a Spaniard or whatever. So you will create your political us and the political otherness. Of course, it happened when I was 17-year-old, that I was like a silly person. Of course, I was in high school. You just think on very stupid things. You are not very aware of what's going on, and you are very mentally, you are very weak. You can easily be convinced in a way to be part of something you shouldn't be part of. Yes, you will never question the functioning or the actions or the rhetorics of the community. You will never question that, because if you will question that, I mean, you could be expelled. You could suffer an expulsion and rejection from the community, and that could be the very worst thing that can happen to you. As I explained in the very first example with judges, this woman who was part of ETA, who was a member of ETA, and then he went to Mexico, and when she came back here, she was killed. Political assassinations or political killings were like an everyday thing, so, and if you will be killed, people will say, he or she probably have done something, he was against the community. So is this what happens in these very dualistic communities and societies? That's the problem you and the situations you can actually face. This is pretty much the outlook, the outfit we would have when we were young, when you were like, let's say from 15, 16 to 22. You will dress, you will cover your face with mask and so on. You will do barricades, and you will throw stones and Molotov cocktails to the police. In the beginning was against the Spanish police, but then afterwards, when the Spanish police left, they will do it against the Basque police, because they were considered to be a part of the Spanish repression as well. Yes, so this is pretty much the Cale Borroca, which was performed by young people. And the paper I told you about before, I do, which is called the War of the Symbols. This one was published in 2008. I do a research on, comparative research on the Black Bloc and the Cale Borroca, and the use of performative violence, which is this concept which is created by a professor there in the university, at the University of Boston, whose name is Jeffrey Juris, and he's a very interesting guy to study this kind of issues as well. So then I suffered this process of radicalization as well, because you see, the most you ascend in this social and political structure, it makes you become more proud, but at the same time it makes you feel, become more radical and feel more proud about it as well. Yes, so here some strategies of alliances and associations are created. Here is where you start meeting your real peers, the people you are politically struggling and fighting. And this is probably the people with who later on I did research, and so there were some good things and bad things about having done this life, path, that it has very good things and has very bad things as well. But I mean, we should just analyze all as they are. Yes. So this hate and hostility against the political and national otherness as well increases in this moment, because as you see, you have been a victim, or you are being a victim of that constitutive violence that I was explaining before, this concept of Glenn Bowman. This even though this violence is imagined, even though it really doesn't exist, you feel as it does. So you will start to create this kind of dualistic discourses among your peers, among your colleagues, considering that there's Spain and everything which is related to Spain, even the Spanish people, all the Spanish people will be your enemies. You'll be against your national group, your national community. So therefore, they will be part of that national and political otherness. Once you are part of this political community, at some point, probably you will be asked to take one step forward. In this case, being from being part of the political to take part in the military actions, ETA. Luckily, I never wasn't asked that question, but even though if I could have been asked that question, I know my answer would be no. Because I mean, I think to do this step, to take this step, you really need to be very, very tough with your decisions. I don't know. I think that I was never asked, but I know that some friends were asked. And And we all knew when these friends took this decision, their lives changed. Some of these people I was friend of and that I spent so many hours, some of them died, they were killed in this struggle, or some of them they have been imprisoned for, some of them they've been in prison for more than 20 years already. Yes, some of them are in exile, but you know, in these cases, most of them felt like, in the other hand, they had this social recognition and this social support. So they thought their fight was worth it. Was I totally don't agree with. So thanks to that, probably I never took that step. I never was asked to. So I'm happy about that. Yeah. So, but again, watching the members of your own political national community go through these kind of processes, like being killed or being dead or having imprisoned, also makes your anger and hate and hostility against your political otherness grow. And again, we keep on rising these rhetorics of identity. We keep on fostering these dualistic discourses. So, you know, the groups, is what I said before. I mean, there's only black and white. There's only two groups. There's no space for the middle. Yes. So that's the difficult, as I said before, the difficult situation for the researchers. In these cases of otherness, creation of the otherness, we have as well the animalization of this otherness, and that's when the political killings happened in the Basque arena and other political arenas as well. In this case, the police will treat it as dog. They will use the word dog to define and describe the political otherness. When we tend to explain like policemen, members of the Spanish army, even members of the police army, even some politicians, Spanish and Basque politicians. So they will consider as dog. So these people are taken through a kind of rite of passage to a liminal state where they are animalized, or they're treated as objects, or they are treated as military objectives as well. In some cases, we know this concept has been used as well. Sorry, the collateral damage. So, you know, people and victims are not treated as victims anymore. They just treated as objects. Yes. Once a person is excluded from the community, all his human attributes are, you know, are denied, are just not considered anymore as human. And that's the way the person who's going to kill the victim treats it like an animal, like an object. So this is what happens with judges as well. The example I gave in the beginning, she was already treated like an animal. You know, she had these political graffitis in the town she was living. It was a very small town, so every time she will leave her house, she will see like these paintings, these political graffitis on the walls of her own house, like you're a traitor, you're a dog, you're gonna die. So this is one of the problems of the animalization and the political killings in this kind of situations. Yes. There were also a fact, which is the creation of a specific spaces where this elimination of the otherness was accepted. So as explained before, when some people were killed, you know, people will say, people from the community, even though they were against the use of violence, they will say, well, probably she or he has done something, because why would they kill her anyway? So we had this kind of rhetorics of identity, and this kind of speeches we were really, really terrible and dangerous, actually. Here I gave you some books. Well, the first one is a classic one, is Mary Douglas, and which is interesting to learn about these issues of which is the purity, which is, and how can you go into that dangerous situation? And then we have Joseba Zulaika, who is a professor at the University of Reno, and he's an expert. He's a Basque person, actually. He's been, I think, like for 30 years. When writing about ETA was really dangerous, he was one of the first ones writing about ETA. So probably these three books that I gave you here are very interesting to know more about the Basque conflict itself. So what's the problem with these rhetorics and discourses of animalization and dualistic discourses, that they all can end up in extermination, such as the Balkans in Europe from 1991 to 2001 with more than 200,000 deaths, or in Rwanda with the fight against all the killing of the Hutus of the Tutsis, while more than 1 million people were killed, assassinated actually in 1994, or even this conflict, which is even from before in Cambodia with the Khmer Rouge from the 75 to the 79, with more than 2 million people were dead. It's all people, all the victims were considered like were considered as animal. Their human attributes disappeared suddenly, and they will be killed by even their neighbors or people they would know from before. So that's what happens in very dualistic societies, such as the Basque or the Northern Irish one, that at some point you might be killing your neighbor, which is something terrible. As I said before, all this signaling the enemy, the political and the political and national otherness will be done in the Basque arena through the use of political graffitis, and that could be the way of fostering that social hostility against the otherness. Yes, so I like to use this concept of the performative pictures, and it's like this very classic book as well of Austin, like How to Do Things with Words, about talking about performative language as well. So I'd like to use this one phrase here, is how to do things with pictures. Yes, is how with these political graffitis, I mean, you can just explain what you think and what you are going to do and who are you excluding and why you are excluding it. So once you are a researcher and you change your role as a member of the community and you're becoming a researcher, that you're starting to do something different from being part of that community and analyzing it, you can just go into this group of the otherness. Like, and you just become a traitor as well. In my case, it didn't happen, but I know of cases that happened, and some of them, they just left the Basque Country, or some of them remained there, and thanks, nothing happening yet, because it was more polemic to, let's say, commit a political killing of a member or of an ex-member of the community once he has left it, and he's part or he's now a researcher who just want to research the whole process. But this animalization of the otherness was done as well in the Spanish arena. So because there was, as I said before, there were like some paramilitary groups, and being a researcher in the Basque Country was also very difficult because the paramilitary groups didn't want anyone to be doing research on their own terrorist actions as well, because this was a state terrorism as well. Yes. So well, this elimination, extermination of the other was two-faced phenomena would happen in the both sides. Yes, journalists, politicians, policemen, military members of the army were killed, but from both sides. Yeah. So as I said before, the Basque conflict in the 80s and the 90s and the early 21st century was a very difficult situation, a very difficult scenario and context to carry out research. Normally, someone could start being part of a certain community, political community, through some politicized spaces. In the Basque case, for instance, was the Rico Taberna. The Rico Taberna was some bars that belonged to the one party that I explained before, that was the political party of ETA, who was Izquierda Abertzale, Herri Batasuna by that time. They had these bars in every town of the Basque Country, and you could just go there, have a drink, you know, and talk about politics. So you will just create your own political identity. You will create just your political otherness, and you will, you know, it's pretty much where everything was done. Yeah. Then we also will have the Tosnes and the music festivals, where, you know, you will join with your friends, certain very politicized spaces where you, again, you will do pretty much the same. Also within the political demonstrations, because in the Basque Country, political demonstrations are an everyday thing. You can have a political demonstration any day, and sometimes during the year there are some specific demonstrations to defend the rights of the ETA prisoners that they can gather like up to 200, 150,000 people. There are huge demonstrations. Yes, there are also very many political meetings and gatherings where you probably are the places where you will create that political as that political community and therefore your political otherness. But again, what does it mean for a researcher being an insider doing research? What is the consequences? Well, if you're still part of the community, if you are not that active politically, but you're still part of the community, you have your friends, you have your contacts, people, you have access to testimonies and confidential information that you wouldn't have before. I mean, if you are an outsider, you otherwise you wouldn't have this information. Okay, I mean, it is impossible being an outsider to arrive to certain spaces. Yes, sometimes you have the complicity of the research subject. I mean, you have his phone number, you can just call, hey, can we do an interview? Can I ask you something? And you have that complicity, so you will have access to those testimonies and confidential information that I was explaining before. You also have an objectivity in details and testimonies that are given to you by these subjects. Okay, because they know you, you're a friend of them, you know them, so they won't try to hide or then try to make up the whole reality. Probably they will tell you things how they are. Yes, and you will also have access to restricted spaces and situations, such as political demonstrations, where if you were an outsider, if you were a member of the press, you were a journalist from a Spanish newspaper or whatever, you wouldn't be allowed. People will kick you out from the place. Yes, so being an insider means that you have access to privileged information. You can get a very important information. In my case, when I was because as I will explain later, I just quit the movement, and that's when I started to do like my political studies, visual anthropology, and so on. So I started to do videos, interviews with these guys that I knew from before. So I'm gonna give you a very short example of one of these. I am very sorry for the subtitles. This one video, I mean, lasts like 2 minutes.
And actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Roman, but just to do a quick time check, I think this video is a really great example, and maybe that's something we can show after 1 o'clock if folks are able to still come on. But I wanted to make sure, because I know some people do have to go at 1, and if anyone had any questions as Dr. Roman is concluding, to please type them in the Q&A box, and we can try to do that. I just want to do a quick time check for us all.
I'm so sorry for the time.
Oh, you're fine. This is great. No, this has been really enlightening and also personal for you to share this, so thank you. So if you maybe wanted to do some concluding thoughts, and then we can certainly show the video after 1 o'clock for everyone.
Oh yeah, do you want me to, do I have like a couple of minutes to conclude?
Yes, we have about 2 minutes until 1 o'clock, but
all right,
for our attendees, please type away if you have any questions. Thank you.
All right. Shall I wait then?
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Okay, I'm super sorry for the time explaining these things. Well, as I said before, once I quit the Basque country, I went for a year to live to London and totally quit my political community, my political scaffolding went down, and then I even joined a political party who was a shift of the left radical. I decided to quit the conflict and decided to take a peaceful way of doing politics. I present myself as a mayor in a Basque town, defending the peaceful ways of doing politics. Doing that, I became the otherness of the community. I'm sorry to be so late with this. And I do think that, just to finish with this, that the role of an insider, as being an insider researcher, it has very good things, such as it can have some problems that regarding objectivity. Maybe if you are part of it, maybe you are not as objective as you should. But being an insider, you have access to this information, privileged information that you wouldn't have otherwise. You have the problem of being emotionally involved as well, which is can be as well a problem. But I think just to conclude with this slide, that I want to say that neither position is completely wrong or right. I mean, both ways of conducting anthropology research or social research have their pros and the cons, and both ways of doing anthropological and sociocultural research can be carried out simultaneously, but you have to be aware and you have to intentionally separate both dimensions because it's very important. And I guess that mixing both perspectives we can achieve like very interesting and relevant scientific works. I'm so sorry because this was so long. I just finished.
Oh,
Sorry
no,
about
not
this.
at all. You covered a lot of ground
I'm sorry.
and not a lot of time. So thank you. Does one of our participants have any questions? I don't. Oh, great. So, Dr. Gorka, when you use, so our question is, what do you intend by the statement unconscious choices? How dictate our political positions? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sometimes you can make like political choices, not thinking you are taking part of something you are really taking part of. I mean, as I said before, when you are a teenager, you can meet these people, you can join these political groups and communities, and you just want to be popular, or you just want to gain some prestige. But what you are doing in the end is just joining a political movement and you can end up using the armed violence, which is a very big problem. So I mean that sometimes you take decisions and you don't really know what you're doing because you just being part of that mainstream, this political and social mainstream.
Wonderful, thank you. Any other questions? Going once. And I think at this point, so it is 1:01 now. Thank you all for joining us. We do have time. We'll stay on to play the video for anyone who's interested in staying on for that. So yes, and if the folks who have to go, oh wait, we have one more question. Thank you. So in response to what your response to the first question, Dr. Roman, sorry, so you become personally detached from the impact. Is that what you mean? Following the conscious choices question.
I don't really get that. Sorry, I'm not a native English speaker, so
Sorry.
that's my problem. I get lost in translation sometimes, and I don't want to answer what I shouldn't be answering.
No, you're fine. Can you ask? Can you rephrase the question, please? Sorry, I don't know if there's a delay on my end between the question and answer, so apologies for that. The meaning of the impact of your choices made. How about I will why don't we go ahead and play the video, and I will message with the questioner.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry for the audio, for the subtitles.
Horrek guateri pasatzen zenien edo urruntxe baloretazu horrez azpi ordue gazauzena barruen zuagarrik hueltak esaten guazostitzo nik hemen edo da fuerte hoitxe zara edo ez dakit zozera esateko kriston nik uste dut izan dela nire biziko momentu txarna di azkenien ez dakizu ze paseokan zuaz, ez dakizu mongo batzen hostik ez dakizu furgoneta esartzen zuen nien norazoa zen nun paretan zuen furgoneta salatu zitien lako gerrekta baten ilunetan gabaz, karo da zauz, agurtxu betzu bakarrik zauz, sortxigaz, neure karpizeta beta doaz dana, karo da zu, hosti, ez dakizu ze paseokan zuaz.
konparatuko nuke adibidez Turkiako kasuarekin, bai, ez? PKK partiduaren ilegalizazioarekin eta Kurdistango herriarekin, ez? Nola jipetzen duten herri hori bera, ez?
Nik ez dut errazorik, segon sartu inoiz, halako movimentu politiko baten bez, nik nintzen bertara personaldeko manifestazioa zelako da, klaru dabelako kartxela eta pasetan da dispersioak ze jarri deuen eta hori dana. Eta, buenas barroias tope nintzen, bertan, sin comerlo ni beberlo, da hori,
Y por quemar un cajero es que, pues nada, yo qué sé, te meterán en el cuartelillo, te mandarán una multa por tal del mobiliario urbano. Y las TGT que te la vas a llevar igual, claro.
Beredikto bat, jun orduko hartunde. Osa, guztuko azten epaik eta hon bat izeti eta nire kontrako akusazioa esan desórdenes públicos y atentar contra la autoridad. Osa, en el peor de los casos, hasta masaren gauzak analititan, 7 urte alzeragoan kartzelan. Horregaz delitoagaz.
Ni gartxelan egonda naiz, nire anaia gartxelan dago, nire aita gartxelan egonda da, nire ama gartxelan egonda da. Eta ez dakit holan zenbat denbora jarraitu behar izango du. Eta holan hainbat eta hainbat famili daude Euskal Herrian eta Euskal Gazteriak asko sufritzen duela, ez? Zeren poliziaren idatzi bategatik espetxen dugu, igual 6 urte, 10 urte, edo
Y aquí en Madrid a gente que no sabe la historia, hablar de cualquier tipo de movimiento allá arriba, es como ya la ETA, es toda la ETA, no existe nada más. O sea, aquí la percepción que se tiene en Madrid de la historia vasca es que no hay otra cosa que no sea ETA y el gobierno, contra luego los gobiernos autonómicos, el sociata, el que sea. No hay otra opción. No hay más.
Ahora cuando txulondu ninduten zipaioek, eta kriston pelikula asmatu zuten, ez? Esan zuten ni eta beste 3 lagun kontenedore batzuk berre genituela.
Asko egon ziren, baina benetan egon ziren agarrize botaten eta pelotaza botaten euren arti ibili ziren. Eta gu beste guztitxeak beste 5 pertsona ginen urrun, viendo un poco lo que pasa, a ver que termine ya y venga. Baina lako baten arranque bezen mi furgoneta gureñe, bai. Para disolver, jakin min que éramos de la manifestación, da hori, sortitxarrokin nahen, da hori.
Eta beraz, nik zer pentsatzen dut Espainiako justiziari buruz. Ustelduta dagoela,
Pues tiene contacto con ETA, con la Kale Borroka, o sea, están metiendo bastante mierda, ¿sabes? Para meter caña aquí en Madrid, que la gente vea pues que cuando te empiezas a mover un poquito, te meten eso para que la gente se te eche encima y...
Borrokari armatuari lotxa, pausu bat dela, ez? Euskal Herriaren aldeko, eraikuntzaren aldeko pausu bat dela. Arazo hau konpontzeko? Nik uste dut bakarrik aldetu behar zaigula zer dutzen. Bakarrik.
All right, thank you for sharing that. Dr. Roman, do you have any other words you want to add about the video?
Oh no, that I'm so sorry that it took so long before I went to the very, the topic of the presentation. I didn't check that one. Sorry about that.
Great. And so I have 2 more, and then we'll wrap up after these. And apologies for my my slow Q&A section over here. But so sort of in response to your answer to the first question about So essentially, were you saying, in other words, that the individual makes a choice that they do not realize aligns them to or with one group or another and remains personally detached from the consequences? Is that the essence?
Yes, indeed. That is,
Okay,
sometimes
great.
you make decisions and you don't really know which is going to be the, the extent, the result, the consequences of those choices. That's pretty much what I want to say.
Great, thank you. And then our last question. I see the positive point of obtaining privileged information, but is it privileged information only from one part of society and therefore biased, or is the Basque society fully homogeneous?
No, the Basque society is super diverse as any society which is immersed in a conflict. I mean, you cannot have a conflict in an homogenic society. I mean, it doesn't happen. No, yes, you get the information from one of the parties, but it's much easier to get the information from the other party. I mean, in this fight or in this conflict, you have two parties. You have the Spanish one, let's say the Spanish army, the Spanish government, and they all have their own speakers, which is the mass media and so on. So that part of the information you do have. What you don't have is the part of the information of the people which are, carrying this fight in an illegal way, let's say, and they cannot show up, and every time they saw on TV is because they do like some, clandestine videos or testimonies or so on. So getting this information from these parts of the conflict is very important, because now you have the information from both parts. Of course, I don't want to take just the information from one of the parts. I want to take the information from both parts and then create my own research. So that's the thing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much to all of our attendees and to Dr. Roman for being here with us today. And thank you again, Dr. Roman, for sharing all of your research and insights with us.
Oh, thanks a
It
lot.
was really wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.